Welcome to Transbiblical, a podcast where we talk about how gender variation is as ancient as stories about creation. In fact, that's the very first sentence in the new book, Transbiblical. My name is Katy E. Valentine. This is a limited series podcast, and I'm going to bring you authors and friends of the book to talk a lot about gender identities like transgender, non-binary, and so much more, all in conversation with the Bible and other ancient texts. Let's get started. Hi everyone, Katy here, and we're back for another episode of Transbiblical. And today is my story. And I didn't want to give you just a rambling monologue, so I asked, and she graciously agreed, my co-editor, Melissa Harl-Sello, to come in, and I'm going to hand it over to her. She's going to take the reins and guide us through this conversation.
Well, thank you, Katy. I think it's wise for us to introduce ourselves a little bit, but of course, every follower of this podcast already knows a lot about Katy Valentine. And I just want to tell you how grateful I am for your having initiated this project.
Oh, thank you.
Of the podcast, and I think it's gone really well. So why don't we start anyway, just in case there's someone new to the podcast, if you could say a little bit about who you are, what you do, whatever you'd like to do to introduce yourself.
Yeah, and I don't know that I've shared a lot about this because I'm always on the other side of the microphone. So yeah, we'll go for it. So I'm Katy Valentine. I'm a New Testament scholar. I think that's come out in the other previous episodes. What maybe hasn't been as visible is that in addition to my scholarship, I actually don't have an academic position where I'm teaching full-time in a university or college setting. Instead, I do spiritual coaching, and I do a lot of woo-woo stuff that doesn't always necessarily neatly fit into the academic box. So I talk about chakras and energy and angels and all that kind of stuff. I became a shamanic practitioner a few years ago, and I promised 10 years ago if I was saying any of this, I probably would have cringed a little bit to say it with an academic colleague, but Melissa is so gracious, and I found that many academics are actually very curious about this kind of thing. So yeah, so I do spiritual coaching, small groups, individuals. I'm actually taking a little break from it right now, but probably by the time most people hear this, I'll be back in the swing of it.
Well, that's really fascinating. I actually see aspects of that kind of insight in your chapter that we'll get
to. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I'll be curious what you see, and we can talk about it.
For those who don't know, what was it that happened to make you a co-editor of this book? I had to answer that question when you had
Yes. So the sort of dry answer is, and I'll get to the maybe more juicy answer part of it in a moment, but the dry answer is that this is a need within our kind of very small academic scholarly guild. And so the way this works, if anyone's kind of not steeped in the world of academics, which why would you be unless you're one of the academics who happens to be listening to this, is that we all get together like in a big meeting once a year, and maybe there's other societies that have smaller meetings, and we present papers and ideas. And I noticed that there was very little on gender identity, a lot on gender, but most of it had a cis hetero presumption around gender. And so I presented a paper back in, I want to say 2016 on actually, which was the kernel of what turned into my chapter. It had a small section on the Transfiguration in it. And that went pretty well. I saw a need. The next year we put forward, I think it was the next year or the year after, we put forward a panel, which you were a part of, and many creative people. And it was really the first time at our conference that we had a whole panel on gender identity, specifically trans identities. And that was, I thought, a pretty smashing success. People actually showed up. They listened. People were talking about it. If you get more than 10 people in a room at these things, it's a pretty good deal. And we had, I would say 80 or 90. I'm sure I counted at the time in the room when you were giving your talk. And so Jay, the other co-editor, and I got together. We had co-sponsored that panel and said, let's turn this into a book. So that's the short answer. The longer, sort of more woo-woo answer is, and I've shared this several times in Melissa's presence, but I don't think I've ever shared it on the podcast, is that several years before that, I was driving around in my car, and I was in the terrible space when you have turned in your dissertation, but you've not yet defended it. And you walk around basically with every muscle in your body tense and your ears are up around your shoulder. And at the time, I was applying for academic jobs. And so I was trying to think, what's the next project? That's a question you have to answer. What's your next project after the dissertation? You have to have this like 50-year plan lined out. I had no clue. I had zero clue other than I was just ready to get this dissertation done. I did not know what else I was going to do except kind of more of the same. So I was just thinking about this. And I remember so distinctly, I was driving down my block where my now husband and I were renting a house. And I just heard, it sounded like a voice coming from the back seat that said, you're going to work on like transgender and Bible. And it was so vivid. It's about the only, maybe this has happened one other time. It was really, really vivid. So much so that I turned around in my car to see if there was someone in the back seat. And I wasn't talking out loud. I mean, this was all, the conversation was kind of going on in my head. There wasn't. I turned back to the road to make sure I didn't crash. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I don't know anything about this other than what any, Pose wasn't even on TV yet. Other than, watching like some kind of bad documentaries back that were 15 or 20 years old. I didn't know very much. And just this voice, the divine, the kind of inner knowing within me, whatever you want to call it, said that's not relevant right at this moment. This is what I'd like you to do. So just get busy learning. So then I got busy learning. So that's kind of the predecessor to how I ended up in any of this work. And if we go back even further in time, I don't remember this, but my mom tells me when I was little, we always went to church every Sunday. And I always went up to the little children's sermon and the little kids go up to the front, get a little mini lesson, come back to their seat. And she said I was coming back every week, just furious. I was about 3 or 4. My arms were crossed. I was just furious. And she was, yes, completely. And she said, honey, what are you so mad about? What's going on? And I said, well, they keep on saying amen. She said, okay. I said, why don't they say a women? So I've been really aware of
That's wonderful.
Right, of gender identity and not making gender this essential experience for anyone. And so I think that naturally applies to trans identities and sort of self-exploration.
Well, I have to say the first publication of yours that I read was in one of the Oxford handbooks where you had
on trans women's voices.
Yeah, where you had done interviews with trans women and especially about the meaning of particular passages. I believe the Galatians 3:28 was a central one, which is part of your dissertation, if I'm not incorrect. And I found that a very helpful and enlightening article, in part because my own trans experience was a little different. It's good to know that we're individuals, we're all
so varied.
Yeah,
everyone had such a different story, and those doing those interviews was so wonderful because people, I mean, it really kind of snowballed. I didn't do like hundreds or anything, but I did a couple of dozen. And once the word got out, somehow it got to Peterson Toscano, who does all the like humor and dramatic interpretations of the Bible and does like really, really cool stuff. He did some really neat, like fun stuff with Joseph and the skirt and kind of transness woven through, queerness woven through his work. And someone gave him my number and I got this text message that said, this is Peterson Toscano. Like, you're interviewing people. How can I help? And like, he got the word out. So all these people were texting me really eager to tell their stories. To tell their stories, to be heard. And that was such a privilege. And I just can't thank all those people enough for sharing their stories with me. Most of them anonymously. And a few kind of with their given names.
Right. So I think it'd be really cool if you could put a link to that chapter in the Oxford Handbook, which should be available somewhere in the comments or notes.
Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes. Yeah.
Great. So stepping back now into the discussion of the book itself, Transbiblical New Approaches and so on. Is there a part or several parts of the book that particularly excite you that really you think are going to make a difference, that brought you to a new understanding of something that you'd like to share?
Yeah. So, I mean, everything is just so great. Virtually every person that's come onto the podcast, when I've asked them this question, they've said, oh my gosh, Joy, how do you pronounce her last name? Layton. Joy Layton's chapter. And for me too, Joy's Joy's chapter on how we can all, what's the right way to say it? She says it better, but we all have trans experiences, whether or not we're trans. And I think Joy does that in such a way that doesn't diminish the trans experience, but invites people into experiences that may also be parallel to being, not parallel to being trans, but have a little transness in them.
Yeah, that give insight into what a
If,
transgender person is feeling or how someone like me responds to a certain situation. So the trans experience is the broader category that we all as humans share. I think she's so right about that.
yeah,
And transgender experience is a more narrow part of how transgender people experience transness and so on. Yeah, I agree. It's a
yeah.
really great chapter.
It's just so helpful. And I think that one is going to be, if I put on my fortune teller glasses, I think that one's going to be pretty landmark. People are going to be returning to this and then refining it and adding to it.
Since I am in the academic profession, in terms of I used to get paid for it anyway, now retired, I also think the introduction that we did together with Jay Marshall's leadership, leading role, is a really helpful intro to a seminary or grad student who really wants to be, or even a colleague who
Yeah,
it knows about biblical studies or knows about gender studies, but has never combined them. And this is a way of learning a lot about the history of trans experience, but also the way in which trans perspectives have slowly gotten their way into discussions of scripture and the theory and some of the key points in the literature. So for anyone in our audience who is in that situation, preparing for their doctoral exams in biblical studies,
yeah. Read it.
yeah, for sure. And
Yeah, and
goes
that
among
was
the other chapters.
yeah, and
Yeah.
that one was really fun. I mean, Jay did the lion's share of that. But my small contribution in that was outlining some of the church responses, which I have to say this really strongly for the church people out there, which preceded the academic study of trans and Bible. And it was a lot of parents who saw the gap, wanted resources for their non-binary or trans kids, and gosh darn it, they wrote them. That is amazing. That is not easy to do. And most of them without background kind of in biblical scholarship and what kind of resources there are. I mean, these people were really, really creative, doing really creative things. And so that was really fun to revisit. Some of those resources aren't even available anymore because they were on like denominational websites as a download, and they've just been updated since then. But to all the parents out there who were writing those, just kudos and thank you. Because those are the only resources practically that I had when I first started reading in this world.
One of the pioneers, though, was Justin Tavius Sanis,
Totally.
excuse me, who's one of our co-authors, teaches at United Theological Seminary here in the Twin Cities, and he wrote a book that's now come out in a second edition, lightly altered, I guess, that set some of the parameters really for the connection between theology, church experience, because Justin's also a pastor, and his own chapter on the Good Samaritan, reading the parable of the Good Samaritan, I think is also very insightful for lay people and those who are specialists. But let's okay.
Oh, well, Justin, when I first started Justin and I were in the same location or in the same state, at least, when I first started doing this work. So I was talking to him a lot. And I said, I can't find anything on Bible. And he said, have you read my book? I have a whole chapter on Bible. And so that is really helpful. And those, I know I've said it before, but I will say it again here. The book Transgender by Justin, the second edition is called Transgender. So many people in those interviews told me that book saved their lives, like literally saved their lives, that they were contemplating opting out of life, and that reading that told them that they had a place in the story.
Yeah.
And so it is so important. It's such an important book.
That. And I think we're products of the same doctoral program in the Bay Area.
Yeah, different departments, but same.
Yeah.
Same campus anyway.
But we can't go too long before getting to talk about your own essay in the book. which is a favorite of mine, actually, based
Oh,
on
thank you.
the way you do the work and the insights you bring to it. The title is Putting the Trans in Transfiguration in Mark 9, the famous story of Jesus transfigured in front of his closest disciples and with then some angelic or whatever they are, co-conspirators up there on
Yeah.
and I just found your approach, which involves a variety of methods, I think, one of which is comparative archaeology or comparative history of religion, which speaks to my heart as a scholar. But why don't you give us a little overview of your contribution, and especially highlight for us what you think a major takeaway would be for people?
Sure. Let me start with the takeaway, which is that maybe Jesus' gender is much more than meets the eye, more than we thought it was. We so often capitalize pronouns for Jesus with a capital H. He, him. We do that for God all the time. I think this does a real disservice to thinking about gender. So I'll start with that. Maybe there's more to Jesus' gender than meets the eye.
Well, I love that formulation. There's more to Jesus' gender. Not that it's more complicated necessarily. I mean, yes, but it's not just that we get it wrong. Yes, but the idea that it's expansive somehow.
Expansive. Yeah, I think there's a both and, not an either or here.
Yeah, that's
we talk about really about a lot of people's genders, but then especially Jesus' gender.
Okay, so that's a good takeaway, but how do we get there?
Yeah, so how do we get there? So when I was doing those interviews and I asked people, what scripture, if any, is meaningful to you, several people kept on bringing up the Transfiguration. And the third time this happened, I thought, oh, this is not just a one-off, like it's important to one person. This is actually a really meaningful story to many trans Christians. I said, well, why? And the nutshell answer that people gave me in a variety of ways was they couldn't quite put their finger on it because it doesn't say explicitly, but they're like, something happens on that mountain and something happens to Jesus' body. And I think it's a gender experience. I think there might be a trans experience there. And I thought, well, that's a super cool reading. Can I prove it? Can I show it? Because I've got the toolkits and the skill, hopefully the skill sets to go into, like you said, comparative stories, ancient religion, ancient experiences, and see if we can make a case for that within the story. So the story itself, I look at the one in Mark, but they're really similar in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It doesn't appear in John. And so in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, it really, or at least in two of those stories, the only thing it really says is, and then Jesus was metamorphized. We translate that as transfigured for a bizarre reason that I can't figure out. Jesus was metamorphized. Metamorphized, I think, has a clearer description. Right? That implies, when we talk about metamorphosis, we're talking about a big change. Transfigured kind of has to me that, like you're transposing something in front of someone, like it's a screen or something like that. That's not implied in the biblical story, but it kind of has that, it's kind of very lofty feeling, especially the way we King Jamesify the story. Metamorphize, like something is happening there. So when I look back in all of these different stories that circle around the Transfiguration, that circle around this metamorphosis, I found out there's a lot of metamorphosis stories in the ancient world. Scholars have known that. We've talked about it with this story of the Transfiguration for years and years and years. But many of those stories have a gendered component. And that, to my knowledge, had not been lifted up before. So we find that often, maybe not often, but frequently enough in the ancient world, gods begin as women, become men. Sometimes gods make humans from one gender to another. Often people they metamorphose into all sorts of things. It's not only a gender experience. Sometimes people metamorphose into birds or other kind of animals. Birds is a big one. They were really obsessed with people turning into birds. But on occasion, we get these people changing genders. And I don't even like that word. Are they changing genders? Whatever the better terminology would be, I'll figure out in the future.
It's revealing gender.
Revealing gender.
But
yeah,
I don't know how that applies to Mark 9, but anyway.
Right. And sometimes these stories, it was maybe not a willing change. Sometimes God did it as a punishment to people, or sometimes maybe to keep them safe from the anger of another God. But occasionally, we do get a sense that gender was confirmed in these changes. There's a couple stories where gender is confirmed, and I found those to be really illuminating. And we don't often look at it or we haven't been looking at that from a like trans perspective. And so in these same stories, there's light that's emitted, there's sounds, there's a lot of things going on that create a divine event in the same way that we might think about that. So when you look at the Transfiguration, the disciples are looking at Jesus in utter terror when Jesus is metamorphized. They can't figure out what to do with this. And the only thing Peter can think to say is, we'll build a shrine. We'll build a shrine to you and to Moses and Elijah up here. But the reason for their terror is not very clear. I can imagine them feeling overwhelmed. I can imagine them feeling in awe. I can imagine them like a lot of things, but why are they in terror? And so we've said they're in terror because they're seeing the resurrected Jesus. And I was like, that doesn't inspire terror. That inspires something. I don't know, maybe not terror though. Again, that I can sort of sense a feeling of overwhelm. But seeing Jesus, maybe a rapidly changing body that confirms Jesus' expansive genders, I can imagine that being fairly terrifying to some cis hetero Galilean men.
Yeah.
And so in a nutshell, I do think that what happens on the mountaintop here is more than meets the eye with Jesus' gender.
There's some interesting threads that work through several of the essays in the book, and the question of metamorphosis is one of them.
Yeah.
So for example, Jada Calloway's chapter on Paul and the idea of the glittery body that Paul discusses in 1 Corinthians 15 with this very form, this very same verb that we get in Mark and parallels. And that's interesting to me. So I don't think we can draw a tight limit around this one story in the Gospels.
No.
That's just that's the strange thing that happened. If you do something that most academics would find improper and you read 1 Corinthians 15 against Mark 9 and so on, still, as readers of Scripture, I think we're very much allowed and encouraged to do such things. We could think not that it's a displaced resurrection appearance story, but it is a sign of a heavenly identity that any person could hope for, in an afterlife kind of situation.
Yeah, and I think every time Paul uses that language of form and metamorphosis, like he uses those a lot, he's talking about people's bodies.
Yes.
Anyway, it's not talking about a metamorphosis of the spirit. I mean, Paul does talk about that sometimes, but he is like really actually as anti kind of body as we tend to think Paul is. I think Paul is actually talking about that our bodies will undergo something really cool at some point in the future. Yeah.
Yeah, and another possible reflection of all this is the notion that Jesus takes on human form. So we get in Philippians 2 taking on the form of a slave, an enslaved person. And the Gospel of John, where's another chapter of our book, is on the opening of the Gospel of John and the whole question of becoming flesh. And that's a strong, from the viewpoint that Jesus is a divine figure who's taking on human form for a period of time, if one takes that point of view. That's a very strong metamorphosis, or metamorphosis.
Very strong
in English, yes.
Yeah, and at the end of the Gospel of Luke too, when the resurrection appearances of Jesus, on the walk to Emmaus, the followers don't recognize Jesus. Why not? Why not? How is Jesus looking? How is Jesus appearing? Strangely warmed. Then Jesus becomes recognizable. From a super woo perspective too. I mean, some of the work I do involves past lives, future lives, the way our soul incarnates. And over the years and many readings and some of my own experiences, this is just me, this is not a defense or an apology or trying to persuade anyone. But I do think that we come here many times and in many forms because our soul longs to experience the variety of humankind.
Well,
So
I'll
we
have to
count as
talk
many
about the
different races.
Outlander
Oh,
story sometime with you.
totally. I'm a fan. But
I know it's
yeah,
Scotland,
but
not Ireland, but still.
that's okay. But yeah, but if we are, I think we long to experience many genders, to know what many cultures are like, what many languages are like. And we can't do it all in one lifetime.
Mhm. Yeah, that's really fascinating. And I suspect there might be an element that you would find of retention of some sort of, I don't know if genetic or other kind of knowledge of these other lives or experiences, or is it all
Sometimes
wiped away and then it's totally gone and we don't learn
we
anything from it, you know?
generally I think we are learning, personally, but generally what we tend to remember are the unresolved things that we need to heal.
Yeah,
So, and then sometimes we get some happy memories just to let us know that we're, on the right track
fascinating.
there. But suffering, Buddha says it well, right? Like suffering is a common human experience,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So we often do remember our suffering, especially when that suffering is unresolved.
Well, stepping back again to the book as a whole, um, what what do you think is the important role that this book might be able to play in conversations going forward, both in churches or in the world generally? One, since I'm in the U.S., I think a lot about this a lot in terms of our political environment, and I know you are
Yeah.
extracted from that for at least the time being. So, but anyway, whatever you have to say, I'd love to hear.
Yeah, I mean, the world's on fire right now, and gender identity is one of the things that's burning. And so this is so important. And I just made plane reservations yesterday, and it annoys the fire out of me that I have to put what my like gender assigned at birth is. They don't word it like that. That's basically what they're asking. And one airline actually did have multiple options, and I was pleased with that. I couldn't believe it, because in the past it's usually just are you male or female? What's it say on your what's it say on your license or on your ID? But in the US, I think it's more what does it say on your birth certificate,
Or
uh,
your passport.
or your passport, which is getting harder to get. So although I'm somewhat inoculated from this, not living in the US right now, I'm passionate about right about justice in all forms. So my these things, history comes and goes in big pendulums, and we're seeing a pendulum right now swinging in a way of oppression and of narrowly defining people. I have no doubt that the pendulum is going to swing the other way. But the chaos and the hurt and the trauma that this particular pendulum is bringing to people makes me angry, makes me sad, makes me all of the above. And I try to hold space to see it from a bit of a long-term perspective when I can. And other days I just come home on my couch and need to cry about it. Pick up something inspiring. So I hope that the book will serve as something inspiring for people on the days when they just need to come home on the couches and cry about this. Because it's tough out there right now. Long term, I hope that the book becomes a classic and becomes outdated. Right, that there's new things happening. I've said if we were starting this book now, it would look really different. There's a lot more out non-binary, a lot more out trans people within the scholarly world, doing really cool, innovative things that unfortunately aren't in here, but they're going to do their own thing, which is just great. And so hopefully building a library and a body of work that people can turn to. So yeah, I guess it's my hope that when someone is feeling like they're not part of the story, they can open Transbiblical and see that in fact they are part of the story and always have been. That they
Could you
always have
quote that
been.
opening line for us?
Yeah. Make sure I get it exactly right. Gender variation is as ancient as stories about creation,
Yeah.
and probably even more ancient.
But thinking of our audience, we're talking about the first page of the Bible, so to
Right.
speak.
Yeah.
Um, um, yeah, so as we start to wrap up, we've heard quite a bit about other things you do, but is there some particular project you're on right now that you'd like to highlight? Would you like to share some ways in which to be in touch with you, if people want that?
Yeah, I'll put links to my socials in the show notes for sure. Facebook and Instagram are good ways to be in touch. I'm trying to be a little more intentional with my YouTube channel for anyone who wants more woo in their life. Academically, I'm working on co-editing a volume on reproductive justice
Uh-huh.
and the Bible, and so looking forward to that. That's a while before it comes out. But if anyone wants to be in touch with me about like woo chakra stuff, you can just go to my website. And actually, I'll have a link on there where you can book like a free mini session with me where we do a little energy reading together. So that may be of service to anyone who's out there. We can talk about different ways that I help people. So it depends on if you're academically oriented.
Yeah. Well, I'm the academic side of it, I guess. But I mean, I am a practicing Christian. Trying to get better, practice. But
Yeah.
I'm intrigued. This is the first time I've heard, I think, that you're working on this other project about reproductive justice in scripture. And that sounds to me like it might be something like our project where you start in one place and by the time it emerges in the world, things could be different.
So different.
Hard
Right.
to predict. But such essential work. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah. And I think the theme that threads all this together is embodiment. Like how bodies and our bodies are viewed in the world, how they're politicized in the world, how they're weaponized in the world, and how they're also sacred. And so that's the kind of common thread, I think, between these. Was really hoping to get a trans male perspective in the book, but alas, not so far.
Well, Katy, thank you so much for thinking of the notion that we need to interview you and give you space to talk about your approach and your interests and your contributions, which are many and very, very important.
Well, thanks for being on this side of the microphone. I really appreciate it.
Okay, well, I guess I won't see you until we meet in Boston for the next big meeting of Bible nerds and so on. For those of you who don't know, there'll be a panel of other scholars responding to our book. So that's
super exciting. Lovely. Thanks, Melissa.
Okay.
As we wrap up this episode, just a few things I want you to know. First, we are nearing the end of this season. It has been so much fun, but there'll be 1 or 2 more episodes, and then we'll be taking a break before season 2. And I'm hoping that season 2 will be bringing in trans activists, trans clergy, people who are in the middle of it in churches and in public life, and talk to you about their experiences and, of course, about the Bible. Second, if you would like to contribute to the podcast, of course, there is a link to buy the book. There is a link to buy me a cup of coffee as part of the cost of production, and that is very appreciated if it's within your means. Third, I know that the world is on fire. I said that earlier in the episode, and it's tough out there right now. I totally get it. Do find ways of staying centered, of staying grounded. You matter. Your personal health matters. Your mental health matters. Do what you can to stay grounded and to stay in there. And reach out to me if there's any way that I can help you with my services, spiritual coaching. I have some free meditations, things like that, too, that I'm more than happy to pass on your way. I'll make sure that my email is also in the bottom of the show notes so you can reach out. So we'll see you in the next episode, and I'll keep you up to date with the rest of the season and the future of the podcast. Thanks so much.